The most feared man in the city was on his knees, his expensive black suit covered in the wet dirt of a fresh grave. He was sobbing like a small child who had lost everything. This man was Juno, the iron fist of the underground, a leader who usually settled problems with blood and a single cold look. But here, in the quiet cemetery, he was just a husband whose heart had been ripped out of his chest. He traced the letters on the cold stone that read Elena, the name of the woman who had been his only light in a dark world. He screamed a loud roar of pain into the wind, not caring if anyone saw his weakness. But 50 yards away, hiding behind a weeping willow tree, a woman watched him and cried into her hands. Elena was not in the coffin. She was alive and watching her husband fall apart. Just as she was about to run to him, she saw a red laser appear on Juno's chest. A sniper was aiming right at his heart, and the people who tried to kill her were now coming for him. This is the most important aspect of the story. Where are you watching from? Comment your country below. 6 hours before the funeral, the city was gray and cold. Juno sat in his massive office, staring at a half-read book on the table. Elena had been healthy and happy only days ago, but then he got the terrible phone call. The doctors said it was a sudden medical tragedy, but Juno's predator instincts told him something was wrong. He had promised to keep the violence of his Mafia world away from their home, but the darkness had seeped in anyway. His second-in-command, Kenji, walked into the room. "Boss, the funeral is ready," Kenji said with a fake sad face. Juno didn't know that Kenji and a strategist named Hannah were the ones who had planned Elena's death. They believed Elena was making Juno soft because he wanted to leave the crime life and go clean. They had used a special poison that made it look like she died naturally, hoping to take over the empire while Juno was too sad to fight back. Elena shivered behind the tree as she remembered the taste of bitter almonds in her tea. She had been paralyzed, unable to move or breathe, while she heard the traitors laughing about how easy it was to remove her. She was saved by a miracle. A doctor who owed her a debt had swapped her body and given her an antidote just before it was too late. She had stayed hidden because she thought Juno was the one who ordered her death. But seeing him now, broken and crying at her grave, she realized the truth. He didn't know. He was a victim just like her. She wanted to scream his name, but she knew the killers were watching the cemetery. If she revealed herself now, they would both be finished. Back at the penthouse, Juno walked through the empty rooms that still smelled like Elena's perfume, vanilla and jasmine. Everything was exactly as she left it, a throw blanket on the sofa and a coffee mug in the sink. He sat on the edge of the bed and noticed something impossible. Sitting right in the center of the nightstand was a silver bracelet with a flower charm. Juno's blood ran cold because he knew with absolute certainty that Elena had been wearing that bracelet when she was buried. He had seen it on her wrist himself. He grabbed his gun and tore through the apartment, roaring for the intruder to show themselves, but the rooms were silent. He rushed to the security room to check the cameras, but the footage from the last 3 hours was missing. When he looked at the computer log, his heart stopped. The system had been bypassed using a secret code that only Elena knew. Suddenly, a new message popped up on the monitor. It was a note written in the secret code they used when they first started dating. It said, "The old iron mill. Midnight. Come alone, or I stay dead forever." Juno knew it could be a trap set by his enemies to kill him, but he didn't care. He had to know if his wife was a ghost, or if she was truly back from the grave. He drove to the rusted iron mill on the edge of the city, moving through the tall grass like a shadow. He stepped into the moonlight of the main building and called out her name. A figure stepped out from behind a turbine, and when she removed her cap, Juno fell to his knees again. It was Elena. She ran to him and held him tight, whispering that Kenji and Hannah were the ones who betrayed them. Juno's tears stopped, and his face turned into stone. The king was back, and he was ready for vengeance. The next day, the Mafia bosses gathered for a big meeting. Kenji stood at the head of the table, telling everyone that Juno was too sad to lead anymore and that he should be the new boss. Hannah sat next to him, smiling cruelly. Suddenly, the lights went out, and a video started playing on the big screen. It was a recording of Kenji and Hannah in the hospital, laughing about how they had poisoned Elena. The lights slammed back on, and the heavy double doors at the end of the hall swung open with a loud groan. Elena walked into the room wearing a bright red dress that looked like fire. Kenji screamed in terror, thinking he was seeing a ghost. Juno stood up and looked at his cousin with dark eyes. "You tried to kill my soul, Kenji," Juno said. As Juno signaled his guards to take the traitors away, the floor beneath the table began to shake violently, and a loud explosion rocked the entire building. The building groaned as black smoke filled the grand hall. Juno grabbed Elena, pulling her close as the ceiling began to crack. "Kenji, you coward!" Juno roared through the haze, but the traitors were already scrambling through a hidden exit. This was not just a takeover, it was an execution. Juno knew he had to get Elena out of this death trap before the rest of the building came down on their heads. Outside, the city was silent, unaware that the king of the underworld was fighting for his life alongside a ghost in a red dress. The explosion had been perfectly timed. Kenji knew that even if his secret was revealed, he could bury Juno and Elena under tons of concrete. As Juno and Elena stumbled out of the service entrance into the freezing night air, they saw Kenji's black SUV speeding away. Juno's eyes burned with a cold, terrifying fire. He didn't care about the money or the power anymore. He wanted the people who made his wife suffer to feel every ounce of the pain they had caused. "Sang!" Juno shouted into his radio. His loyal guard appeared from the shadows, his face covered in soot. "The safe house is compromised, boss. We have to move." They raced through the narrow streets of Seoul, the tires of their car screaming as they turned sharp corners. Elena sat in the back, her hand gripping Juno's tightly. She was still pale, the poison still a faint shadow in her system, but her eyes were sharp. She was a Nigerian woman who had survived the toughest parts of her own country before coming to Korea, and she wasn't going to let a group of greedy mobsters win. "They are going to the docks," Elena whispered. "I heard them talking when I was paralyzed. They have a boat waiting to take the gold to Sicily." Juno looked at her with a mix of awe and heartbreak. He had spent years trying to protect her from this life, yet she was the one providing the key to their survival. "We don't go to the docks yet," Juno told Sang. "We go to the armory. If Kenji wants a war, I will give him a massacre." They arrived at a nondescript laundry building that hid Juno's private stash of weapons. As they geared up, Juno handed Elena a small, sleek pistol. "I never wanted you to touch this," he said softly. Elena took the weapon, her fingers steady. "You taught me that we weaponize our tragedy, Juno. This is for my grave." Meanwhile, at the Han River docks, Kenji and Hannah were frantically loading heavy crates onto a private yacht. Hannah was shaking, her expensive fur coat ruined by the soot from the explosion. "She's a ghost, Kenji. I saw her. How can she be alive?" Hannah shrieked. Kenji slapped her, his face twisted in rage. "Shut up. She's flesh and bone, and she's going to die for real this time. Once we are in international waters, Juno's reach ends." He didn't know that Juno's reach was already at his throat. The docks were shrouded in a thick, artificial fog. Suddenly, the lights of the crane above them flickered and died. A single, haunting sound echoed through the shipping containers, the sound of a silver bracelet clinking against metal. Hannah froze, her breath catching. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. From the darkness, a voice came, echoing from the speakers of the dock's PA system. It was Elena's voice, calm and terrifying. "The granite was cold, Kenji, but the water will be colder." Panicked, Kenji's men began firing into the fog, shooting at shadows. It was a waste of bullets. Juno and Sang moved like phantoms, picking off the guards one by one with silent efficiency. Juno was no longer the weeping man at the cemetery. He was the Iron Fist, and he was reclaiming his throne with every drop of blood spilled on the concrete. He emerged from the mist, his silhouette framed by the moon, holding a heavy sledgehammer. He didn't shoot Kenji. He wanted to finish this the way he had finished the headstone, with pure, raw power. Kenji pulled out a detonator, his eyes wide with madness. "Come any closer, and I blow the whole dock." I'll take you both with me. Juno stopped, his hammer resting on his shoulder. He looked at Kenji not with fear, but with pity. You think you're the only one with a backup plan?
Juno asked.
Just then, Elena stepped out from behind a shipping container, but she wasn't alone. She was holding a tablet, her fingers dancing across the screen. I've already frozen the offshore accounts, Kenji, she said. The boat isn't moving. The crew has already been paid double to walk away. You have nothing. Kenji looked at the yacht, then back at Elena. The realization that he was trapped broke what was left of his mind. He lunged at Elena with a hidden knife, but Juno was faster. The sound of the sledgehammer hitting the ground was like a thunderclap. But as Juno moved to end it, a loud, high-pitched whistle filled the air. A fleet of police boats with bright searchlights rounded the corner of the river, and the voice of a negotiator boomed over a megaphone. Juno Park, put the weapon down. We have the building surrounded. But these weren't regular police. They were wearing the same black tactical gear as the soldiers from the shipyard. Juno realized in a split second that the police weren't there to arrest them. They were there to make everyone disappear. A sniper's red appeared not on Juno, but on the detonator in Kenji's hand. No! Zola screamed. Wait, Elena screamed, as the sniper fired. The bullet didn't hit Kenji. It hit the explosive crates on the yacht. A massive wall of fire erupted, throwing everyone backward into the dark, freezing water of the Han River. The freezing water of the Han River swallowed them whole. Juno felt the icy pressure crushing his chest, the roar of the explosion still ringing in his ears. In the dark, murky depths, he reached out frantically, his fingers brushing against silk. He grabbed Elena's arm just as the current tried to pull her away. With a desperate kick, he broke the surface, gasping for air. The docks were a nightmare of orange flames and thick black smoke. The yacht was a skeleton of fire, and the tactical police were already moving toward the water's edge with high-powered flashlights. They're coming to finish the job, Juno wheezed, dragging Elena behind a half-sunken wooden pylon. Elena coughed up river water, her red dress now heavy and dark like a wound. She looked at the shoreline where the soldiers in black gear were methodically scanning the river. Those aren't just mobsters, Juno, she whispered, her voice trembling but sharp. Those are the phantoms, the same ones who tried to hunt the girls in Chicago. Juno's eyes narrowed. He didn't understand the connection yet, but he knew one thing. If they stayed here, they were sitting ducks. We have to swim to the old drainage pipe, he commanded. They stayed low, their heads barely above the water, moving silently through the debris of the explosion. Behind them, they heard the cold, mechanical voice of a soldier over a radio. Target not found in the wreckage. Expand the search. No survivors allowed. They scrambled into the mouth of a massive concrete pipe, the smell of damp earth and rust filling their lungs. They walked for what felt like miles in the dark until they reached a hidden subbasement under an old laundromat. This was another one of Juno's secret spots, a place he built when he first arrived in the city with nothing but his name. He found a first aid kit and a dry change of clothes, simple English-style sweaters and trousers. As Juno patched a deep cut on his leg, Elena sat on a crate, staring at a small laptop she had pulled from a hidden wall safe. Juno, look, she said, her fingers flying across the keys. She had hacked into the Phantom's encrypted frequency. They weren't just helping Kenji. They were using him. Kenji promised them the Brooks codes in exchange for your throne. Juno froze. The Brooks girls? The sisters from Chicago. Elena nodded. The world thinks they are ghosts, but the Phantoms know they are alive. They thought I had the codes because I'm Nigerian, like Zola. The realization hit Juno like a physical blow. This wasn't just a fight for his empire, it was a global hunt, and his wife had been caught in the crossfire because of her heritage. Suddenly, the silent alarm in the laundromat above them tripped. The screen on the laptop flickered, showing the security feed. A tall man in a long, elegant fur coat stepped into the room. It was Kenji's mother, the Dragon Queen. She wasn't dead, and she wasn't happy. She looked directly into the camera lens, a cold smile on her face. Juno, my dear nephew, she said, her voice echoing through the basement speakers. You always were too sentimental. You chose a wife over a kingdom. Now, you will lose both. Before Juno could grab his gun, a heavy metal canister shattered the high window of the basement. Thick, green gas began to hiss into the room. Gas masks. Now! Juno shouted, but it was too late. The gas was fast-acting. Elena's eyes went wide as her muscles began to lock up again, the same paralysis as before. Juno lunged for her, but his legs gave out, and he crashed to the floor. The heavy steel door of the basement was kicked open. The Dragon Queen stepped inside, followed by 4 silent soldiers. She looked down at Juno, who was struggling to crawl toward Elena. She reached into her coat and pulled out a gold key, the same key that once locked a shipping container in a distant shipyard. The phantoms are tired of waiting, she whispered, leaning over him. If you won't give us the codes, we will take the only thing you have left to trade. She signaled the soldiers. They didn't grab Juno. They grabbed Elena. As Juno's vision began to fade into black, he saw them dragging his wife away toward a waiting black helicopter. The last thing he heard was the Queen's voice. If you want her back, bring the Brooks sisters to the Seashore Nature Park at dawn. If you bring the police, she dies for real this time. Juno's hand clawed at the cold concrete, his heart screaming, but his body was a prison. The room went silent as the helicopter roared away, leaving him alone in the dark with a choice that would decide the fate of 2 families. Juno's lungs burned as he sucked in the last of the clean air near the floor. The green gas was heavy, swirling like a hungry ghost around the room. He watched, paralyzed, as the black boots of the soldiers carried Elena away. Her red dress, now tattered and soaked with river water, dragged across the concrete floor like a final goodbye. The door slammed shut, and the heavy iron bolt clicked into place. Juno was alone in the dark, trapped in a body that refused to move, while the woman he had just found was being stolen again. The silence that followed was louder than the explosion at the docks. For 30 minutes, Juno lay there, his mind racing even though his fingers were frozen. He thought about the Brooks sisters, the 3 Nigerian girls he had protected in Chicago months ago. He had given them a home, a chance at life, and a way to disappear from the phantoms. Now, the Dragon Queen wanted him to betray them. She wanted him to hand over 3 innocent children to save his own wife. It was a choice between the family he chose and the woman who was his soul. Suddenly, a small, rhythmic tapping sound echoed from the ventilation duct. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. It was a code. Juno's eyes flickered. Only one person knew that rhythm. A moment later, the grate on the ceiling popped open, and a young girl with a natural afro and sharp, intelligent eyes dropped into the room. It was Zola, the oldest of the Brooks sisters. She was wearing a high-tech tactical vest over her olive-green jacket, looking less like a runaway and more like a soldier. You look like a mess, Juno, Zola whispered, her Nigerian accent soft but firm in the quiet basement. She pulled a small injector from her belt and pressed it against Juno's neck. This is an anti-paralytic. Jade figured out the formula after the last time the phantoms used that gas on us. Within seconds, the feeling returned to Juno's toes. He gasped, sitting up and clutching his chest. Zola? What are you doing here? You're supposed to be safe in the north. Zola helped him stand, her face set in a mask of determination that reminded him of himself. We saw the news. We saw the silver dragons falling apart. We knew they would come for you to get to us. She pointed to the laptop on the crate. India's been tracking the Queen's helicopter since it left the shipyard. They aren't going to the Seashore Nature Park. That was a lie to lure you into an ambush. Juno's heart hammered. Where are they taking her? The Old Kong Royal Hotel, Zola said, her voice darkening. The Queen has turned the top floor into a fortress. She's waiting for the sunrise to trade Elena to the Phantom's leader. Juno grabbed his black wool coat and checked his weapon. His face was a mask of cold stone. You and your sisters need to leave. Now. I won't let you be part of this. Zola stepped in his way, her eyes flashing. You didn't let us fight alone in Chicago, and we aren't letting you fight alone here. We are family, Juno. And family doesn't let family go into a trap without backup. The plan was suicide. The Calm Royal Hotel was a massive, golden-domed building in the center of the city, surrounded by guards and high-tech security. But Juno had something the queen didn't expect. He had the very people she was hunting, and they were the ones leading the charge. They moved through the city in a nondescript delivery van, Zola driving while Jade and little Maya monitored the hotel's security grid from the back. "Security is tight," Jade reported, her fingers dancing across a laptop keyboard. "Thermal cameras, motion sensors, and at least 20 phantoms on the roof. But there's a blind spot in the laundry chute. If we can get Juno into the basement, he can use the service elevator." As they pulled up to the back of the hotel, Juno looked at the three girls. Maya was clutching her stuffed tiger, the one he had given her when they first met. "If things go wrong," Juno said, his voice thick with emotion, "I want you to run. Don't look back for me. Don't look back for anyone." Zola checked the clip in her pistol, the one Elena had used at the docks. "We don't plan on things going wrong." Juno entered the building like a ghost. He moved through the steam-filled laundry room, his movements silent and lethal. Every soldier he encountered was neutralized before they could even scream. He was the silent guardian once more, a predator hunting the people who dared to touch his sanctuary. He reached the service elevator and punched the code for the penthouse, the queen's private floor. The doors opened to a scene of terrifying elegance. The queen sat in a white fur chair, a glass of champagne in her hand, watching the sunrise over the Han River. Elena was tied to a chair in the center of the room, a black hood over her head. Standing behind her was Jackson, the man who had tried to kill the girls in the alleyway months ago. "You're early, Juno," the queen said, not even turning around. "I assume you brought my prizes?" Juno stepped out of the elevator, his hands raised, but his eyes were locked on Elena. "Let her go first. Then we talk about the girls." The queen laughed, a cold, dry sound. "I don't think you understand the situation. You have nothing to trade." She signaled to Jackson, who pulled the hood off Elena's head. Elena's eyes were wide with terror, but when she saw Juno, she tried to scream through the tape on her mouth. Jackson pressed a long, curved blade against her throat, the same blade he had used in the shipyard. "One more step and she dies," Jackson hissed. Juno stopped. His heart was screaming, but his face remained a mask. "The girls are in the lobby," he lied. "They think they're coming for a hot meal. If I don't signal them in 5 minutes, they will disappear forever." The queen's expression shifted. She wanted those codes more than she wanted Juno's head. "Jackson, check the lobby cameras." As Jackson turned his head for a split second, the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse shattered inward. 3 smoke grenades bounced across the gold carpet, filling the room with thick, white clouds. From the ceiling, 3 figures dropped on silken ropes. It wasn't the police. It was Sang and the Brooks sisters, wearing tactical masks. The room erupted into chaos. Gunfire flashed through the smoke. Juno lunged for Jackson, his fist connecting with the man's jaw with the force of a sledgehammer. He tackled Jackson through the shattered window, both men dangling over the edge of the 40th floor, held only by a thin railing. "You're a nobody now, Jackson," Juno roared, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing with one hand and Jackson's throat with the other. "And nobodies die alone." Inside the room, Zola and Jade were moving with military precision, keeping the phantoms pinned down while Sang cut Elena's ties. But the queen wasn't finished. She pulled a small detonator from her coat, the same one Kenji had tried to use at the docks. "If I can't have the codes, nobody leaves this building," she screamed. She pressed the button. A series of explosions rocked the floors below them, and the golden dome of the Calm Royal Hotel began to tilt. The building was collapsing. Juno looked back at the room, seeing Elena reaching out for him through the smoke. He had Jackson right where he wanted him, but the building was dying. Suddenly, a red laser appeared not on Juno, but on the queen's forehead. A voice boomed from a megaphone outside. A black military helicopter was hovering just feet from the window. "This is Detective Kane," the voice said. "Drop the detonator, or we open fire." The queen froze. The good cop had finally arrived, but he wasn't alone. He was backed by a fleet of unmarked birds. The phantoms had been betrayed by their own allies. But as the Queen lowered the detonator, Jackson pulled a hidden knife and stabbed Juno in the shoulder. Juno let out a cry of pain, his grip on the railing slipping. He began to fall, 40 stories above the hard Seoul streets. "Juno!" Elena screamed, lunging for the edge. As Juno plummeted toward the concrete below, his life flashed before his eyes, not as a mafia boss, but as a man who had finally found something worth living for. Just as the wind began to roar in his ears, a strong, calloused hand snapped shut around his wrist. He looked up to see Sang leaning precariously over the edge, his face turning purple from the strain, while Elena and Zola held onto Sang's belt to keep him from being pulled over. With a final, agonizing heave, they dragged Juno back onto the tilting floor of the penthouse. Jackson, however, was not so lucky. As the building shifted, the railing gave way, and he disappeared into the smoke and the abyss below. The calm Royal Hotel was dying, groaning like a wounded beast as the lower floors crumbled. "The roof! We have to get to the roof!" Juno shouted over the roar of the fire. They scrambled up the service stairs, the Dragon Queen watching them with a look of pure hatred as she was handcuffed by Detective Kane's men. On the helipad, the wind was whipping the snow into a frenzy. Kane's helicopter hovered just feet away. "Get the girls in first," Juno ordered, shielding Maya from the flying debris. One by one, Jade, Maya, and Zola were lifted into the bird, followed by Elena. As Juno grabbed the edge of the helicopter's skid, he looked back at the city he had ruled with fear for so long. The empire was gone, buried under the rubble of the hotel, but as he climbed into the cabin and felt Elena's arms wrap around him, he realized he had never been richer. They weren't just survivors, they were a family forged in the fires of betrayal and choice. 6 months later, the world was different. The Silver Dragons were a memory, replaced by a legitimate security and community investment firm run by Sang. The Phantoms had been dismantled by an international task force led by Detective Kane, who finally had the evidence he needed to purge the corruption from the city. The Dragon Queen remained behind bars, her gold keys useless against the iron doors of her cell. In a quiet corner of a seashore nature park, far from the noise of the underworld, a small group gathered for a very different kind of Thanksgiving. Juno stood by a grill, wearing a simple apron over his English-style sweater, laughing as he tried to learn how to prepare jollof rice under Zola's strict instructions. Elena sat at a nearby picnic table, her skin glowing in the autumn sun, helping Jade with a complex science project while Maya ran through the fallen leaves with her stuffed tiger. The grave in the private cemetery was gone, replaced by a beautiful garden of white lilies and camellias, not as a place of mourning, but as a sanctuary for the living. Juno walked over to Elena and kissed her forehead, his fingers tracing the silver bracelet on her wrist. "You were right," he whispered. "We didn't just survive the tragedy. We weaponized it into something beautiful." The 3 Nigerian sisters, no longer ghosts, had new names and a new father who would move mountains to keep them safe. Zola looked up from the rice and smiled at Juno, a smile of total trust. They had changed his destiny, and in return, he had given them a world where they didn't have to run anymore. The Korean mafia boss was alone no more. He had found his empire in the laughter of 3 girls and the love of a wife who refused to stay dead.